Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this special Climate Week edition of 3BL Media and Triple Pundit's Learn from Home webinar series. As UN member states convene for the annual General Assembly and stakeholders from businesses, nonprofits, and civil society meet virtually to discuss the future of climate action, we know the moment we're in is critical. Despite the other monumental challenges we face, from the novel coronavirus pandemic to the ongoing discussions around social and racial justice, it's clear that our response to climate change cannot be pushed aside. From the unprecedented wildfires sweeping the US West Coast to predictions about a particularly devastating Atlantic hurricane season, our planet is communicating with us loud and clear. We have no time to waste when it comes to fighting climate change, and now is the time to act. Today, we're honored to be joined by Hannon Armstrong Chairman and CEO Jeff Eckel. Based in Annapolis, Maryland, Hannon Armstrong is the first US public company solely dedicated to investments in climate change solutions. They invest more than $1 billion every year across energy efficiency, renewable energy, and other sustainable infrastructure markets, all guided by their core purpose, which is to make climate positive investments with superior risk-adjusted returns. We first got to know Jeff here at 3BL Media when he was named CR Magazine's Responsible CEO of the Year for outstanding ESG leadership in 2019. In recognition of his active role in aligning the company's interests with all of their stakeholders to truly do well by doing good. Jeff is also an outspoken advocate for the role of business in pushing bold climate solutions forward, and Hannon Armstrong is clearly a leading corporate voice in the fight against this existential challenge of our time. Jeff, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Mary. Pleasure to be here, and I'm sitting in beautiful Oakland, Maryland, in the western part of Maryland at the B&O Railroad Museum. And it's a beautiful day. Let's hope a train doesn't go by. Fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on location. And we're really excited to dive into some of these topics here today. Since day one, Hannon Armstrong's investment thesis is that you'll earn better risk-adjusted returns by investing on the right side of the climate change line, meaning you choose investments that are either carbon neutral or carbon negative. In more recent years, we've seen a growing number of mainstream investors support a similar ideology, but that wasn't really the case before. And I'd imagine you kind of got a little flack for choosing to invest in this way. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about how this thesis works in practice, and do you feel it's paying off?
Great question, Mary. I've been doing this about 40 years, and to me, it always seemed the normal way to invest, to not create environmental issues in any investment you make. And our investment thesis is very analytical. It's not based on polemics or politics or emotion. The investment thesis is grounded in physics, statistics, and economics. Whether you believe in science or climate change science, you can still make money with this. Do I think it's a winning solution? Absolutely. We've outperformed the S&P 500 by, I want to say, at least 10 percentage points annually since going public 7 years ago. And I think we have very much set a bar for other financial investors to take. And that's probably the most important thing we can do is with this investment thesis is make money. That will prove the concept to others who perhaps might not have the same view as we had when we started out. Oh, you've cut out again. I can't.
That's such a powerful statement. Oh, there we go. Here we are. I think that's such a powerful statement to make to business leaders, particularly those who are still really focused on the bottom line, is to say that, hey, we invest in this way, but we're also really focused on financial performance. And we believe that making these decisions and achieving superior returns can go hand in hand. I think that's a really powerful thing to look to prove to others.
And the notion initially was always that you were going to sacrifice returns or you needed subsidies. I think we've turned that ourselves, but also the industry has turned it around on its head. Renewable energy, energy efficiency, pandemic has caused a terrific financial shock these assets are performing very, very well.
Absolutely. In this moment that we're in today, weeks away from a pivotal presidential election in the midst of this global pandemic. I think it might be. I've heard talk.
Okay.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but yeah, I've heard talk.
I'll check.
With all of these things that we do have going on, I think that some people in the sustainability community were concerned that climate change might be pushed to the back burner, but we've seen that a lot of climate activists have really been galvanized by what's happening, by the conversations that are happening around the pandemic, around social and racial justice, and pointing out that so many of these social justice issues and climate issues are inextricably linked, and pointing out that, hey, this crisis that we're seeing with the coronavirus is really merely a dress rehearsal for what could be to come in a scenario of unchecked climate change. And I'm wondering how you feel that business leaders with hearts and minds toward climate action can harness the moment that we're in right now and push for greater urgency. And also, given that business has historically had an outsized contribution to greenhouse gas emissions and to climate change, how do you feel that that people can trust business to really lead on this?
Oh, there's like 3 really good questions in there, Mary.
It's a little too much. I'm sorry.
No, they're great questions. Let me think how to address it. Well, let's take the attitude of capitalism as bad, and I am 100% a capitalist, and I see the profound good that companies do. Not every company, not every board, but when companies are a force for good, they're extraordinarily powerful. And when you go back to a pandemic-induced financial crisis, I think there's a couple pieces that relate to when Trump exited the Paris Climate Accord. Corporations said, government's not going to fix this. Corporations are going, it's either citizens, governments, or corporations. And I would say a fourth, capital, owners of capital. But corporations have stepped up mightily in this process, in part because it's the right thing to do, in part because it makes money, and in part because employees, clients, they're demanding it. We can't wait around for government to fix it, whether it's this administration or the next. The problem is too profound for any one government.
Absolutely. I think that we saw that shift, and through the course of our reporting here at Triple Pundit also, really that decision to start the process to pull out of the Paris Accord really did coincide with a lot of powerful statements and a lot of new commitments from the business community around climate change. And I think that we've seen, in a lot of market research into public perception that, people are really recognizing this role that business can play in fighting climate change, which is, it's really interesting to see. And as a reminder, if anyone has any questions for Jeff, we will be pausing for Q&A as part of this conversation, and you can add your questions in the green box below the screen here. But to quickly move on, one of the ways in which we've seen businesses take a stand for issues like climate action is through, advocacy, is through activism. And earlier this year, you took a powerful activist stance by penning an open letter to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg, essentially pointing out that while the platform took steps to fact check and flag and remove misinformation about the coronavirus, out of concern for human health and safety, it wasn't doing the same thing for climate misinformation, despite the fact that the climate crisis is, of course, also a danger to human health. I'm wondering what made you decide to take this stance and to reach out to Mr. Zuckerberg directly.
I'm still waiting for him to call back, and I won't take the call if it comes during the middle of this. There's a lot of misinformation, and there are a lot of hidden agendas and some not so hidden on this issue. And I think I just got tired of hearing the same stuff. It's not like this is a joke. This is like a really serious crisis, and I really hope Silicon Valley firms do take more responsibility for how their platforms are being used and amplifying misinformation. You no longer have um, uh, journalism as a gatekeeper, and some of it is just destructive. So again, he's not moved. What they did do is create a climate platform. So anybody who is in their silo about believing in climate change, you can get a ton of information. However, if you're in the other silo, you don't have to be troubled by these uncomfortable bits of information. You can stay right in your comfort zone. A nice PR piece, but utterly useless and pointless in my view.
Yeah, we did see that, the new climate platform. I think that's one of the things that I guess is talked about so much about social media is the silos of viewpoints that we all find ourselves in, and we're in our own echo chamber, and it becomes more challenging to learn new information that perhaps you're not super familiar with already and hear from people that aren't already in your network. And it's kind of one of those things that, it's one of those challenges that's just intrinsic to our modern society. And what are we going to do about that, And, please go ahead.
No, please.
But I think that one of the things that we've seen, as we've moved through, reckoning with this pandemic, that's been kind of, if you can say it's a hopeful point, in such a difficult and trying time, is this movement to build back better, right? And this is something that's been out there, certainly in our reporting. Probably won't find it a lot on Facebook, I guess, depending on your networks, but really a lot of national governments out there are saying, rather than rebuild systems that were furthering greenhouse gas emissions and hampering climate action, let's create new systems with an eye toward environmental justice, toward decarbonization, and toward this low carbon future. I'm wondering what you feel the role of business is in all of this.
I think there's a tremendous business idea and opportunity that tackles climate change, social injustice, and the pandemic. Maybe not in the recession associated with the pandemic. Obviously, we're not epidemiologists. And it is central to the business driving it. If you do, as the Business Roundtable suggested last week, the CFTC said several weeks ago, and as I've been talking about for the last decade, put a price on carbon. And take those proceeds and dividend those tax proceeds back to citizens whose gas bill has gone up, their heating bill has gone up, their electricity bill has gone up. You dividend it so they actually are neutral on their cost. And you don't dividend it to wealthy Americans. You dividend it to 70 or 80% of the people who are going paycheck to paycheck. And then all of a sudden you've business will have a price signal to stop polluting, to start investing in cleaner things. Citizens will be relatively indifferent and hopefully cash positive. They'll also see the incremental cost of a gas vehicle versus a high efficiency gas vehicle or an electric vehicle is a wonderful price signal. And I guarantee the clean energy economy is so much more job intensive than the fossil fuel industry by an order of magnitude. You solve all three problems. You get rid of carbon, you leave people in a better position economically, and you move clean investments out of the backwater and into the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. That's such a powerful connection to really economic justice and environmental justice, saying that, hey, we can move in a positive direction on decarbonization. And when we're getting dividends and we're getting financial returns as a result of this, giving that back to people who have really been struggling under our current systems and who are looking to have some relief when it comes to their bills on these things, and to be able to kind of move forward in a more just fashion in these new systems we're building as we build back better. And that's such a powerful connection to be able to make. I think that hopefully we can kind of make that a little clearer to people. And now that we're having these conversations related to the pandemic, really start to see some concrete steps forward there. At this point, I'd love to move over to some questions from our audience. We do have a couple questions coming in. For Jeff, if you all have any questions, please do feel free to add them in the green box down below. But our first question here is, how do you support your employees to get involved hands-on with environmental justice?
The neat thing about working at Hannon Armstrong is everybody's very, very passionate about climate. And that passion translates to a broader empathy in the world around them. I've always said I put the E in ESG in like a 40-point font, and the S and G in a smaller font, and have committed to get everything in the same font. It has been a fascinating education for this 62-year-old white man to see things through other people's eyes that I thought I saw before. I'm not a racist, definitely not an anti-racist, working on that. The entire company has been engaged in that discussion, and it's not that we don't have differences, but there's, I guess the word is empathy for issues of fairness and equality that has been really striking during these last 6 months.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's such an important piece of this conversation, right? Is to recognize not only areas where, okay, we're doing really well here, but where can you improve, not only in your company, but also in yourself, and really, making those connections about how we can grow in a more positive way. And if anybody has any questions for Jeff, feel free to add them down here. We do have another question about small and medium-sized businesses. What do you feel is the role for SMEs in terms of driving climate action forward?
Most companies in the world are small businesses. There's just no question. The solar industry is just filled with a lot of entrepreneurial small businesses that are working hard. There's nothing easy about being a small business, but it's the heart and soul of this country. And whether it's, if you think of energy efficiency at a policy level, it's up here. It's a guy getting in your basement and fixing your HVAC system. It's a very local business. Companies have tried to roll those businesses up and make a big enterprise. Now they still want to know who's down in the basement, who's cleaning the filters, and that's all hugely impactful. Not very glamorous, perhaps, but hugely impactful in carbon. And small businesses have outsized role in that market.
Mm-hmm. The unsung actors of climate action there. That's great. And one other question here is what do you hope, if anything, we can see come out of Climate Week this year? It's an unusual year. We're all connecting virtually. We're not all, going down to New York and getting to meet face to face. But what do you hope, if anything, comes out of Climate Week this year?
I come at this largely in the financial sector, even though my master's was in energy policy. We've tried a lot of policies in my 40-year business career. The one that we haven't tried is putting a price on carbon, as I mentioned. It is profoundly impactful, and it worked for CFCs. It worked for what's the Montreal Protocol, forgetting the gas. It absolutely works. What I think people who are policy focused need to understand is the world is awash in capital wanting to invest in these asset classes. There isn't, I still have yet to find the project that deserved to get financing and couldn't. They're not out there. There's a global search for yield. These assets are very attractive. if it's a project that's soundly structured, it's going to get investment. And so I would urge policymakers to appreciate that capital is ready, willing, and able to invest in this sector. We just need price signals, and it can be profoundly impactful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that when we saw that coming out of the last COP, where that there was actually a lot of business advocacy around, hey, we're really disappointed that we didn't see a price on carbon, a market-based mechanism come out of this COP. This seems to just be something that we're continuing to wait for. Maybe we'll see it this year. That would be, that would be great. We're kind of all keeping our eyes out there. But in kind of switching back over to a question that I had, as we're on this subject, I'm kind of wondering, in the year since COP21, where we finalized the Paris Climate Agreement, we've seen more businesses make pledges to become carbon neutral in their own operations, to start sourcing 100% renewable energy. But something you've already kind of alluded to and touched on a bit that you often talk about is another piece of this puzzle, which is finance emissions. Where is your money going? How are you connected to and supporting activities that may be at odds with some of the goals that you've set internally? And, clearly this is really relevant, in the financial sector, and certainly relevant to the way you invest at Hannon Armstrong. But as someone who's kind of been around this block a few times, what would you advise to other businesses in the financial sector or otherwise about identifying those finance emissions and working to eliminate them?
My annual report letter from last year said there's three things that the financial sector needs to do. The first thing is the investment bankers need to ask themselves, is this deal good or bad for climate? It's just such a fundamental question. Most people don't ask themselves that, but they should. The second thing they should do is disclose every one of their investments. Not just the shiny, pretty ones that they want people to know about, but the Alberta tar sands, Dakota Access Pipeline, you name it. Those are things that you don't see in their ESG report. There's actually been progress on this, and I give Morgan Stanley credit for being the first Wall Street bank to join the PFAC. It's carbon accounting financials. And it's a Dutch-led pension fund scheme that is causing those. You sign up for it, we're members. You disclose all your investments, so investors now have the ability to see what's in your portfolio. If you don't talk about it, nobody ever gets to see it. The third thing that finance needs to do is, this is an enormous problem that's going to need trillions of dollars of capital to decarbonize. We ought to be looking at the efficiency with which we are using that capital to decarbonize. We use carbon count, very simple metric of metric tons of greenhouse gas divided by the amount of capital to reduce those metric tons of greenhouse gas. And I think we're kidding ourselves if we're not actually looking at the impact of directly on carbon emissions from every dollar invested. Some things are not really that impactful. They're not bad, but they're not really bending the curve on emissions.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's a really important distinction, right? Where there's, okay, we don't want to put our money into what's really known as being super, carbon intensive, right? But then there's also, you'll kind of hear about, you see companies investing in this or this, and it's meant to drive a solution forward. But then when you look at some research-based assessments into the impact that has, is it really going to be have as much potential as right. some may think that
That's
it
right.
could.
This is an incredibly complex problem, and there's just so much for business still to learn. But MIT has a fantastic tool, the name of which Gil's going to be mad at me because I've forgotten it every time I've mentioned it. But it has little dials you can push as to which policy metric you want to see, whether it's carbon sequestration or EV subsidies, whatever. And when you boil it all down, the only single policy tool that moves the needle on emissions is a price on carbon. So I'm going to keep beating that drum, and that will fix an awful lot of problems. Everything else, part of the solution. They're certainly not bad, but we need to start doing the most impactful things first.
And on that subject of carbon pricing, I mentioned that we saw some business advocacy around this coming out of the last COP. But we also saw, just last week, the CEOs of the Business Roundtable put out a statement in support of a price on carbon, following, of course, last year, their statement on the purpose of a corporation. I'm wondering how you feel about this. Do you think that's a positive sign for, do you think that we'll finally start to see a carbon market in the future?
Oh, it's very much a positive sign. And it's business, I think, starting to control the narrative on climate change and doing it in business terms. That's the language we speak, and I think it's a brilliant step forward, long overdue. But change takes more time than I like or younger people like. But I think we're definitely starting to get there. And when people start to see it's got bipartisan support, it is clearly if you're a conservative economist, this is what you want. And if you're a progressive, and I think if you appreciate the impact it'll have on the issues you care about, I think it's what you're going to want as well.
Yeah, we really have seen that, advocacy on both sides of the aisle for a price on carbon, really just setting where those boundaries are and creating a system that can account for them and can really, say, okay, here's what we're going to, an active step we're going to take to resolve this that is based on the financial markets and something that a lot of different stakeholder groups can understand and, and potentially benefit from. So, hopefully we'll see some movement on this level. We're seeing powerful CEOs from multinational businesses speaking out in favor of this, and it's certainly not the first time. Hopefully we'll see that kind of movement in that direction. But to kind of wrap things up, speaking about agreement we can have in a bipartisan way. This being an election year, everyone's minds are on ways that public policy intersect with the issues that they really care about. And policy advocacy is another one of these less discussed elements of corporate climate action. And I'm wondering how you think that businesses can use some of their clout, their influence to advocate for policies that promote urgent action on climate change.
Well, I'm very proud that Susan Nickey, one of our managing directors, has been a leader in the creation of the American Clean Power Association. And she's been a real pioneer in the wind industry for a long time. And these are the biggest companies in the industry who are getting together and basically saying we need to pool our political power, our money, so that we are not a rounding error to API, American Petroleum Institute's heavy influence in Washington. And so this is the right step of the clean energy industry growing up. It's no longer solar versus wind versus efficiency. Everybody's got to be all in and rowing in the same direction. We all have a common mission. So we continue to support that group, and we'll urge Susan to do her great job when she's getting on the Hill. And I think there are a lot of conversations post-election that are ripe for the having. People are tired of not talking about this. It's there. Their constituents want it. It doesn't matter whether you're a Republican or Democrat.
People are tired of not talking about it. We have to be all in on the mission together. Really great way to close out this conversation. We're sort of reaching the end of our time here. But Jeff, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on this. We're really hoping to continue tracking a positive direction forward as we move through Climate Week and beyond. But thank you so much again for taking the time today and for helping to lead this discussion here.
Mary, thanks for asking great questions. I really appreciate the thought you put into it and appreciate the opportunity to share some of my views.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Jeff.
Stay
And thanks
safe.
so much to everyone for joining us. And yes, stay safe. And we'll see you on the next time. Thanks again.